The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the Rabbinical Assembly, and Temple of Aaron. Today is the 5th day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 23rd of Av, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Thursday, August 6th, 2026. We will read Parashat Re'eh this coming Shabbat. Let's begin. Parashah. We will now turn to Parashat Re'eh, and we'll look at the Aliyah for the 5th day of the week, the 5th Aliyah in the Torah reading for this week, which is chapter 12 of the book of Devarim, verses 20 through 25. They go like this. When God enlarges your territory as promised, and you say, I shall eat some meat, for you have the urge to eat meat. You may eat meat whenever you wish. If the place where God has chosen to establish the divine name is too far from you, you may slaughter any of the cattle or sheep that God gives you, as I have instructed you, and you may eat to your heart's content in your settlements. Eat it, however, as the gazelle and the deer are eaten. The impure may eat it together with the pure. But make sure that you do not partake of the blood, for the blood is the life, and you must not consume the life with the flesh. You must not partake of it. You must pour it out on the ground like water. You must not partake of it, in order that it may go well with you and with your descendants to come, for you will be doing what is right in God's sight. So these verses really continue with how we're going to eat when we enter the land of Israel. And again, important to know, right, when we were in the wilderness, it really understood, for the most part, or at least according to most commentators, that in order to eat meat in the wilderness, you had to offer a shlamim offering, or a peace offering, or a wholeness offering, however you want to translate shalom, shalem, in order to actually eat of the meat. So every meat had to be a sacrifice offered in the tabernacle. This wouldn't be the case anymore once we live in a country that is, well, much bigger, right? Instead of everyone living right up on top of each other, right? And it's easy to get to the tabernacle. This wouldn't be the case once we live in the land of Israel, when, let's say, the Beit HaMikdash is in Jerusalem and you might live all the way up in the north. It would be very hard to go down and eat meat. But there is something of a difference here of, why is there a difference? Sort of what changes, and what is this sort of portion in general being said about meat, right? And the consumption of meat and our eating habits. I think that's important to look at Rashi here, specifically Rashi on chapter 12, verse 20. So one of the first Rashis on this parsha, he writes, Limda Torah derech eretz lo yitaveh adam lachol basar ela metoch rachavat yadayim v'osher. Right? He specifically says that this teaches the derech eretz. This teaches sort of a moral way of life. Derech eretz means literally the way of the land, and it's sort of a weird category within the Talmud that and rabbinic literature that understands that there's halacha, there are things that are required by God, and then there are things that are just like generally good things to do. Not even necessarily pious things, but just like good things that are good for you to do. Not even necessarily religious things, but things that are also just good for everyday people, just good in terms of the way the world works. And one of those items of Derech Eretz, according to Rashi here, as is pointed out within Hisis, at least in verse 20, is that you should only desire to eat flesh, right? Desire to eat meat, okay, when you are living with a lot of wealth and a lot of possessions, right? You have your needs have been adequately met. And so this is very interesting Rashi, right? You shouldn't eat meat in general when you don't have enough to eat, right? When you don't have enough in general. And I think the idea in general with this is that there isn't, meat costs a lot of money, right? You have to slaughter an animal. You have to use a lot, and so you shouldn't really eat outside your means in this regard. And I think the idea is that when we get to the wilderness, we'll have more means because we are living on our land, we're farming, we'll according to the Torah, at least if we, don't transgress, things will be very good for us, and we'll be able to eat meat, more normally than we were before. But still, it should only be eaten at a time when we are sort of have abundant wealth and abundant possessions. And so I think this shows is that meat here is not seen as a necessity, as something that needs to be eaten every day, or it's sort of a necessity that we need to eat, but rather it's seen as a luxury. Interestingly enough, Rashi is actually getting this from the halachic midrash, and of course from the Gemara. It's also in Chulin as well, 84a. And it comes from this idea from Rabbi Elazar ben Azari, and it's basically the same language in the Gemara as well. He says, "Lo ba katuv al limdecha derech eretz," same thing. "Shelo yochel adam basar ela te'avon," right? So the language of the midrash is that you should only eat meat when you have a desire for it, when you really desire it. Now, what's really interesting is the Sifrei doesn't seem to include the part about abundance and wealth. Rashi seemed to take it from the atmosphere that the Sifra is quoted, that particular idea is quoted around other midrashim that are located in that area of Sifra, and also from the Gemara that it comes from in Chulin, which has a little bit of a larger discussion about this. But it doesn't clearly say this within the midrash or the Gemara itself. And it seems that Rashi sort of adds in the abundance and wealth part. And I think, just to stop at the midrash and say, what is the midrash actually saying? What is the original teaching from Elazar ben Azariah saying, right? That you shouldn't eat, that a civilized behavior, a way of derech eretz, is that to only eat meat unless you really desire it. It seems to be what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying is like, you shouldn't just eat meat every day because it's just something to eat. Rather, you should really wait till you really desire it and then eat it. It should be something special. And it's interesting that the way that this is at least understood by Rashi then is that it should be the specialness means it's really expensive, and therefore you should only eat it at certain times when you have the money. But it's interesting to also think to go back to the original midrashic statement and say, what happens if you only really eat meat when you really, really desire it? It's one thing to be a vegetarian, okay, it's too much for some people, but even if you are a meat eater, just eat it in special occasions or when you really, really desire it, when it's really something special, okay, then you can have meat, but not to make it sort of a normal occurrence. I think what's being said here is that, how do you, knowing that you're going to eat meat all the time now, and not just when you sacrifice it at the tabernacle, how do you make the moment of eating meat still special and meaningful? And also understanding the sacrifice that this comes from an animal, that this needed to be slaughtered. And so I think a lot of these teachings sort of point to that sort of understanding and sort of that discussion. Beautiful verses here. Halacha. We'll now turn to the Mishnah Torah, and we'll start the 4th chapter of the laws on prayer. Very interesting Mishnah Torah we're going to go through today. 4 things prevent one from praying, even though the time for prayer has arrived. Right? Meaning that it is the time for prayer, right? The Zman has reached, right? Whether it's for the morning prayer, the evening prayer, right? We've talked a lot in the 3rd chapter about the what is the proper time to pray and making sure that you're praying at that time. So that is, first most important, right? Are you praying at the right time? But even when the time happens, prayer is not just about opening one's mouth, but also there are certain conditions that need to be met in order to actually pray, right? And these 5 things we really need to pay attention to. Number 1, the purification of one's heart. The purification of one's hands. Taharat yadayim, right? So what is this? This is making sure that your hands are clean, right? That they haven't touched something that is dirty or a bathroom. I've gone to the bathroom lately, or I've touched, places that are, usually covered by garments. And so it's great to wash your hands before you pray. Actually, some places in synagogues actually have a netilat yadayim, a place to wash your hands in the sanctuary. Now, ideally, this would be done with a vessel, but certainly doesn't need to be done, and certainly to fulfill what Rambam's saying, there is no need for a vessel when washing your hands before prayer, because this really is about getting rid of dirtiness or things that may be on your hands. So very, very important here. So good practice, wash your hands, especially if it's been a while since you've washed your hands. Always a good thing to do, and a very good way to prepare for prayer. Number 2, he says the covering of nakedness, right, to make sure that our private parts are covered. And what I mean by private parts are things that are normally covered, that when we walk around people in society, that those parts are normally covered, whatever that means in the society in which you are living, right? So certainly what we would consider private parts, but, most people wouldn't, like, for example, can a man pray in his underwear, right? Well, would you go out in around other people in your underwear? Probably not. Can a man pray with an undershirt on? Small undershirt. Well, if they're not going to go out in public with that undershirt, then they wouldn't do that. Next, the purity of the place of prayer. All right. Well, what does this mean? This means not being around things that are smelly, right? Around excrement or urine, right? Also, that we can't see these things. We discussed a lot of that halacha of where we can pray exactly, but it really has to do with smell and visible urine or excrement. Number 4, things that might bother and distract one. All right, so okay, we're going to go deeper into what that really means, right? So that you can't focus at the time on what you're saying, because remember, Rambam believes that kavanah really here is very, very important when praying, intention. And number 5, the proper intention of one's heart. So it's not just not being distracted, but then that's kind of the negative, like preventing all the sort of outside things that might distract you. But number 5, like actually having the positive intention on focusing when you are actually doing this. So very important. And this chapter really is going to go in detail into each of these things, try to summarize and, what are the conditions that need to be met before we actually begin praying. Musar. We're going to turn to Menorat HaMaor again. We are in the section on speech, and we're going to continue talking about speech today. The early pious ones, Chasidim Arishonim, conducted themselves like the ministering angels. So no, it's really important. We're about to learn something in this text in which the rabbis talk to us and say, this is something that the really pious ones did. Now, I always want to push us when we read these things, especially in Musar books and books of ethical inspiration, because it can be really dangerous when we look at these things and say, this is how I should behave all the time. Like, this is a bottom line of behavior. That's not the case, right? That's why the text says this is something that the really special pious people did. Now, the reason we're learning it is not necessarily because we're all trying to become the really special pious people, but because we all want to be inspired by what the special pious people do. So I think it's important to look at teachings like this and say, okay, this is something that's really inspiring and really meaningful. I can't actually put it into play in my life. It doesn't really make sense for the life I want to live, but I'm still inspired by it and it still informs me, versus, okay, maybe I really do want to try to do that in my own life and try to see if that works and experiment with that. But I think it's important to regard that as an experiment and not as necessarily, something that everyone should rise to. So a little bit of a preamble here, just for safe learning. So the early pious ones conducted themselves like the ministering angels, and they regarded their mouths as though they were sacred vessels, okay? Klei sharet, right? Holy vessels of service. It's interesting also that the translation here is usually vessels of service, vessels of holiness, but actually it really should be vessels of service, of sharet, like Malachi sharet, angels, ministering angels, that translates correctly. And the reason here is because that the mouth is supposed to be used for a certain task, right? That's what makes it actually holy, is that it's used for a certain task. Shein shamshimim behem devarim shel chola lekashayit tzrichim behechrach litasek behem lesorach gufan. Right, that we should only use, as he says, they're sacred because we only use them for, physical things when we actually absolutely need to for the sake of our body, right? We only use them for frame matters, or rather we try to only use them for holy matters. And we spoke about this in a previous teaching a little bit, it's interesting how he already has refined it and said, he's already sort of refined it from even refiner than that, of saying it's both for physical and for spiritual needs. Rather, like, this only seems like it's mostly for spiritual needs, except if you really have to use it for something physical, then you could use it for that. And so, good. Again, this is like an ideal thing, but it doesn't mean that, necessarily we should all be striving for it. It should be an inspiration for us. I think that's where this might really work for us, is like how much of the day is our mouths used for holy things, and how much of our is our mouth used just for physical things, and how much of the day is our mouth just used for complete profanity, right? And or idle talk per se, things that may be considered neutral here. So important for us to look at that, and not saying that's a zero-sum game, but important for us to look at, and that's what a Musar text should inspire us to do. And then is brought a teaching actually from the Yerushalmi, and as the Gemara calls it, as he calls it, I love how he calls it, Vigarsinam beGemar devnei Ma'arava. He doesn't say the Talmud of the Yerushalmi Talmud, as we would call it today, but the Talmud of the people of the West, right? So if you're in the East, yes, Jerusalem or Israel is west of you. And so many, oftentimes communities were living east of Israel. So they said Israel's to the west. And so the Gemara from Yerushalmi goes like this: every conversation is bad except conversation about Torah, which is good. Every plowing is bad except the plowing of Torah, which is good. So what it means here is when we have a conversation should include Torah. Good idea, right? Again, you can see that this is a little extreme here. Is every conversation that doesn't include Torah bad? I wouldn't necessarily say no, but I think it's important for us to look and say how much of our conversation during the day is about Torah or includes Torah in it, and whether I would use that in the widest scale possible for most people. And then every plowing is bad except the plowing of Torah is good. If you look at the commentaries here, what they mean here is allegorically, like really like plowing, like analyzing, trying to talk and understand something very deeply, right? That is really required for Torah, but almost doing this with things that are not Torah, or at least centered within Torah or needed for what the Torah obligates us for, I would say, is considered not so good and can get us into a lot of trouble. And I think what's shown here is oftentimes you think like learning facts is always good, like learning things is always good, talking is always good. It's not. Right? Talking should have a purpose and should be dedicated to a holy purpose. And these things, of course, should inspire us to try to make the center of our conversation around Torah, on things that the Torah, not only topics of studying Torah, but of doing Torah, things that are required by the Torah or desired by the Torah. How is each of our moments of conversation connected to actually fulfilling and doing the Torah in our lives? That's a question we should ask for us. But again, very important not to get too extreme with these teachings. I'm always aware of that. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.